welcome to a very special EWTN Bookmark. Our guest author is Carey, talking to her about her book, Sisters in Crisis, The Tragic Unraveling of Women's Religious Communities. Welcome, Ann, to EWTN's Bookmark. And this is very, very special for me. And even though this book at this point in time is the same book that we talked about 15 years ago, and your book, Sisters in Crisis, was the first book that ever aired on Bookmark back in 1998, for the good or the bad of it. We're very happy, and we just are thrilled to get you down here and be able to talk to you again about this book, which is, in a sense, is your name, and this book has really come back up in the headlines because of everything that's been going on with the sisters in the LCWR, right?
That's right, yes. The book is really a kind of a history of what happened to sisters from about 1955 up until the book came out in '97. Right. And I detail quite clearly some of the steps the Leadership Conference took to sort of evolve themselves into what they are now.
Right, and we're going to show some footage while we're talking a little bit of that original interview, which we actually did at our Sunday Visitor.
That's right.
Back in September of '97. Everybody can see how much I've aged and how you've stayed exactly the same.
No gray hairs at all. And as I recall, your luggage got lost on the airplane.
That's right, it did. It actually did. It did. And I was thinking I had to go run out to the store and buy a suit, and at the last minute it showed up. It's funny that of all the things you remember, right? That would be it. What was interesting with this, because you were on with Colin on our Theology Roundtable just within the last week or so. And we had you on there to talk about what's going on, because the Sisters in Crisis is really, like we said, bubbled up again. What is it recently that occurred that really brought this to the fore?
Well, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith warned the Leadership Conference in 2001 about doctrinal errors in their speeches at their assemblies and some of their publications, and told them to fix those. And they apparently didn't get fixed, because in 2009 it was announced that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was going forward with a doctrinal assessment of the Leadership Conference. And then just this past April, they came out with the results of their assessment.
Now, it's interesting, too, because, you know, when this all came out, you did an article in the Register, which obviously EWTN is involved with the Register. You were on Register Radio. You also wrote something for the Register I thought interesting, connected to this, about Carol Keehan.
Yes.
Is that related, in a sense, to what's going on with the Sisters in Crisis?
Well, I think it's related in a way in that some of the very prominent women religious have been very outspoken in disagreeing publicly with the bishops, and that was the what happened with Sister Carol Keehan. She, of course, is the president of the Catholic Health Association. Right. And Catholic Health Association backed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act that we call Obamacare. When the bishops were very concerned about not providing for conscience protection and funding abortion.
Well, it's interesting, too, because it was kind of similar to, I think, what a lot of Catholics have felt over the years, is sometimes when it seems like the bishops are saying one thing, or they understand that this is what the Holy Father is saying, but these other discordant voices are out there saying, well, no, not really. And a lot of times it was sisters.
That's right. And I think it's very confusing to people because, you know, we've always, at least older people like me, have always respected the sisters. I had sisters from grade school through college as my teachers. And, you know, you expect the sisters to be speaking for the church because they always did before. And now that's not always the case.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, again, when this topic came up and we knew we were going to have you on our Theology Roundtable, we said, let's sit down and talk about this book again for its historical reference. And it was interesting, too, to realize at the time, and I see a lot of books, I haven't seen any other books on this topic, really, and this book is 15 years old. Are there other books? Had you thought about writing another book?
Well, I have thought about updating this book, and there should be a new edition coming out sometime around in the fall or so.
Okay, great.
To update it with the new information.
Okay. What made you the first time write this book? I mean, was this something? Did a Sunday Visitor was the publisher, and publisher, did they come to you and say, well, we'd like to get a book on this, or was this an idea you had? Had you written articles?
It kind of came from both ways. I was at the time a correspondent for Sunday Visitor. Okay. And I think I was the only female correspondent, so I usually was given none topics. And
we've come a long way.
In 1992, the Council of Major Superiors of Women Religious, and another superiors organization, was approved by the Vatican. And I was asked to write about this. And I got to thinking, why did the Vatican approve another superiors organization when we already had the leadership conference? So I became very curious about it and started looking into it some more. And then sisters started writing me and telling me that they were unhappy with the leadership conference.
I see,
and
okay.
so Greg Erlandson, who was then, I think he was the editor at Sunday Visitor, suggested the book.
Okay.
And
Well, it's interesting too, because that whole idea of the LCWR, we hear that, the Leadership Conference in Women's Religious, but sort of like the Catholic Health Association, sometimes people's understanding of what these organizations actually are is incorrect. Let's talk about what really is the LCWR. Is it just a meeting place for the heads of all the religious orders, or is it somehow a unique organization unto itself?
well, it's a very unique organization in that it is a canonically erected entity. Just as some other entities are, like Caritas International, et cetera. The Vatican establishes these, they're canonical, I believe the correct term is canonical person. But back in the 50s, the Vatican asked religious in various countries to have these associations to facilitate communication between the Vatican and the religious. And it was to be a group of superiors, and then the Vatican communicated with that group, and then the superiors went back to their orders. That was before internet, so it really was a very nice way of communicating. And also it helped the superiors to get together and talk about common problems. But so it was established, I think, in '54, and it was then called the Conference of Religious Superiors of Women Religious in the United States. And it sort of evolved as Vatican II came along. There was some misinterpretation of Vatican II directives, and the rather liberal sisters got into control, and they changed the name in 1971 to the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, and they expanded the membership to not just major superiors, but leadership teams.
What's a leadership team?
A leadership team would be, for instance, the Vatican, canon law says you have to have one superior for a province, and then there's a Mother General, say, in Rome. Or if, say, it's an American order, like the Sisters of Loretto, who educated me, they're an American order, so they would have one major superior in the United States here. They decided they wanted a group of people to help them make decisions, and so they would have maybe a council of 6 or 8 or 10 people, which the Vatican doesn't mind, but the authority is supposed to lay with the major superior. And the problem is with the leadership teams, all these extra people were given authority.
Kind of this collaborative mentality was very popular, certainly coming out of the 60s and the 70s,
right? And that's one way the sort of liberal-leaning people got in control at the Leadership Conference, because the more traditional orders were keeping the one superior model, and the other ones had these leadership teams. So everyone on the team got a vote, but only the Mother Superior from, say, the more traditional order
It would be like having the Senate and the House of Representatives mixed together.
That's right, that's right. And so they were overwhelmed by these teams.
Well, that's interesting, too, because, and I remember this in looking back through the book, in Chapter 6, the coup, you talk about, because it is kind of the idea how that happened. You said back then, the confusion among members was so great that many members simply did not understand what they supposedly had approved at the Special Assembly. Adding to the confusion and concern of some members was the fact that a new 5-member executive committee made up of the 3 conference officers and 2 other sisters appointed by the National Board apparently had assumed sweeping new powers. So there was a lot of changes being made, constitutions were being rewritten, and orders were basically just assuming that these were fine without making sure they got approved. And I think, as you point out here, is while the sisters are working in the vineyards, teaching in your local school, a parish, or working as a nurse in a hospital or something, this is what's going on in the back room. Many of them don't even know it. And the point you just made earlier, I thought was very interesting. I thought about the whole, because we have the internet today, the idea that people immediately can see what's going on and get information immediately, rather than this kind of like, I can only know what I'm being told. And that's not the case anymore.
No. And in fact, I was amazed. I asked some sisters if they had actually read the documents from Vatican II, and many of them said, oh no, Mother Superior told us what was in them. So if you got a Mother Superior who was misinterpreting the documents, that it was easy for the sisters to buy into that.
Right. And especially, I think, in understanding, because it's a chapter, the re-education of Sister Lucy, you kind of talk about it. The idea that a lot of times you were dealing with young women coming out of the 1950s who were very young when they might have gone into, right, the convent. And their theological background may not have been that extensive because they were formed to be grammar school teachers or to work in other support fields, right?
Right, and that's one of the things that Vatican II brought out, was that it said that the sisters, that all religious really, should be more educated in theology, and they should, in their prayer life should be more perhaps scripture-based. A lot of the prayer life was this rote recitation of, prayers that have been in the community for maybe 200 years or something. And so Vatican II actually wanted the sisters to become more enriched.
Mm-hmm. And that was the part I would think had to be confused, because I know for lay people it was, where a lot of cases all of a sudden things that you thought were, in a sense, people would use the old example of, well, you can't eat meat on Friday, it's a mortal sin, now all of a sudden it's okay. And then kind of a goofy extrapolation. Well, if that's not true, then whatever else isn't true? And you have all these sisters who suddenly have, like you said, they're kind of very strict, in a sense, spiritual life. This is how you live your day. This is the order of the day. Suddenly there's freedom without some support system to it. People go off the rails.
Well, this isn't really what Vatican II wanted to happen either. It wanted a slow, incremental examination of all of these customs that they had, and they were given something like 10 years to see what customs you might want to get rid of and sort of experiment and see how this works. And then after 10 years, you should evaluate and throw out what doesn't work, but keep what does. Well, instead of doing, and they were only supposed to be the little incidentals of life. It wasn't supposed to be working in a apostolate together and living together and praying together. It was to be whether or not you have to have Sister Susie with you when you walk around the corner. They used to not be able to eat in the homes of lay people. So they said, lighten up on that when she goes to visit her parents, for heaven's sake, have dinner in the dining room instead of out in the doorstep. So, but not the really essentials of religious life. And so many orders started getting rid of these little incidentals and kept going and got rid of the essentials too.
Well, if you think about it, and certainly I was going to school, and I remember in the 60s watching even the sisters I saw from the full habit to the modified habit, and they just kept on going, And again, in a sense, it's like some changes that might have been at the time for the particular order, that might have been the right thing for what their charism was or whatever, to carry something out. But it just seemed to be, which we run into the slippery slope we hear about, once the doors open and you get the change going, then the people who have other agendas show up.
That's right. It's very difficult to stop it when it starts like that.
Right. Now, let me ask you, was there a Sister Lucy, or is she an amalgam, or?
Sister Lucy was the name that was sort of made up in a speech by Sister Madaleva, who was a Holy Cross sister. In fact, she was president of St. Mary's College. And she was a very wise woman. She realized that sisters were being sent into the classrooms without having their bachelor's degrees. They might have had 1 or 2 years of college. They'd be sent into the classroom to teach during the school year and then sent off to college in the summers. It was taking them 20 years to finish their degrees, the poor nuns. So she gave this talk about the education of Sister Lucy, who was this sort of fictional character she made up, in which she said, we have to start educating these women before we put them into the classrooms and before we put them into the nursing situations.
Now, one of the things I know, and you talk about near the end of the book, in a sense of kind of wrapping things up of how it happened. One of the things you talked about was kind of like the fact that a lot of these sisters went from this very controlled environment with a limited education, and suddenly the world got turned upside down. So again, these were positive things in the sense that yes, the sisters should be treated better. They shouldn't be, because let's face it, a lot of us were able to get a Catholic education.
Oh, yes.
Which is the most educated group in the United States, Catholics, because of basically the total sacrifice of the sisters, right?
I went to the same grade school my dad and his siblings did. And so I and my siblings and my dad and his siblings paid no tuition at our grade school because the sisters were teaching for what, $25 or $50 a month. And because of their sacrifice, we got this wonderful education. And we did take advantage of the sisters. We didn't appreciate them enough, that's for sure.
Right, and now that they're not around, I guess, as much, though there's a lot of, there's some springtime there, and we can talk a little bit about that too. But let's ask you, Chapter 9, how did feminists gain control? You talk about how there were sisters who maybe weren't always happy. However, these sisters were often reprimanded or belittled for being old-fashioned or unwilling to accept change when they expressed concern about many of the radical transformations being introduced into their communities.
I talked to innumerable sisters. After my book came out, the letters came flooding in. And sisters would tell me, this is exactly what happened in my community. You know, we tried to say, these changes aren't right, you're deconstructing the whole community, it's going to fall apart. And they would be marginalized, they would be scolded, given a bad assignment. Some of them were even sent for psychiatric treatment. And unfortunately, that's still happening.
Let me ask you, we all know, and the numbers are in the book, you talk about, we talk about how many sisters there used to be as opposed to there are today, and there's fewer than there was even what you have in this book. The sisters who left, did you have a sense at all, were they predominantly sisters who lost their faith in this kind of life because they realized that they were more liberal in their view of the world than they thought inside the convent? Were they more Orthodox sisters who just couldn't live in the new environs of this much more liberal order? Was it a mix?
I think it was a real mix. I think there were some who did not like the changes. They were not what they had bargained for in religious life, so they left. There were others who thought changes weren't fast enough. And also it became more acceptable to leave.
Right.
You know, in the old days, when you went into the convent, it was you were sort of outcast if you didn't stay.
Yeah, you leave in the middle of the night or something.
Exactly,
like that.
and then you never had any contact. You were not to have contact with the sisters.
Well, in a
after
sense,
that.
it's like divorce in a lot of cases, because as things become more acceptable, or people not going to church, I guess, in many ways. What was the Quinn Commission, and is the new look at it going to be any different?
Oh, I think so. The Quinn Commission was established in 1983, I believe, and it was named after Archbishop John Quinn, who was appointed to look at it. And he was to examine religious life in the United States because vocations were falling off so badly. However, the Quinn Commission kind of got co-opted. The Leadership Conference of Women Religious was in charge of setting up a lot of these hearings they had across the country. It got co-opted.
Those the listening sessions?
Yes, exactly. Right? There was a lot of whitewashing of reports. Father Tom Dubé, who is on EWTN quite often.
The late, great Father Thomas
Dubé. He's passed away.
Yes, unfortunately, yeah.
Well, he told me when I was writing my book that he was given by his order a questionnaire to fill out for the Quinn Commission. And when he was given the questionnaire, he was told, don't say anything negative. And so he said to me, of course the reports came out and said everything's great in the United States with religious life because they were told not to report anything negative. This time, I think the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith means business, because this is very serious, with serious doctrinal errors being promulgated by religious, very serious. And it's not just, the media likes to pick up on their favorite one of, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith is beating up on the sisters because they're working with the poor and they're not preaching enough.
Right.
That's not the case.
Which is ridiculous.
Serious doctrinal errors.
Right.
Having to do with the Trinity and the Eucharist.
Right. Well, that but that doesn't play that well in the press. Well, let me ask you too, because you talk about in section 16, where do the sisters go from here, which is actually 15 years ago, and we can ask that question again today. You say, clearly one of the elements that has enabled the unraveling of women's religious communities is denial. Let me ask you, are they still in denial, and have they gotten worse?
Yes.
I mean, the ones who were off the rails, are they that much further off the rails today than they were 15 years ago?
Yes and yes. I think they're in denial. They do not want to accept the fact that mistakes were made. And we all make mistakes. Right. They don't want to accept the fact that mistakes were made. And now I think it's even worse because they keep saying they're creating new forms of religious life. Well, right,
that's a great phrase. It's new forms of ministry, right?
Yeah, and it's new forms of religious life. I mean, well, to me, there's the church form of religious life, and then, you know, you could maybe be secular institute as a form of consecrated life, but that's not religious life, and what you're doing isn't either. It's very confusing.
Well, was your impression when you did that, I mean, was that just a rationalization for these people, or did they really believe it?
That they're creating new forms, you mean? I think they really believe it. Some of these people are very convicted and very sincere, and they really think they're doing the right thing. And I pray that God can inform them better.
Why do you think that they're still, after all this time, you watch it change, and I know you can, is it just a milieu? Is it just a lack of humility? I mean, what is it that you're just so far down the road you can't remember where you came from?
Well, I think that the CDF document was very clear when it said it thought a lot of this was the result of 40 years of bad theology and poor formation. And you know, 40 years of that will do that to a person.
Right. Well, let me ask you, we talked about as well with this book, and you talked about a new edition coming up for you, but were you surprised that other people didn't write really other books? Or let me ask you, at the time when this first came out, you know, we did the interview, it aired, obviously the book was out there. How well did it sell originally?
It sold very well. I think they printed 5,000 copies originally and sold those out and then had to print another 5,000. So it's
like a bestseller, 10,000's around for.
Yeah, it's pretty good for a religious book, I'm told.
Right. So, well, let me ask you, did you get a lot of pushback?
I got some pushback. Some sisters were very angry with me, but I would say it was about 10 to 1, the ones who were very positive and very encouraging and very thankful. I'm still in communication with sisters who are thankful for having seen this book, and it's reaffirmed their own positions because they felt alone before, and now they're very happy that
they realize that they're not alone, and
yes,
there's others out there. And when you did the interviews with the leadership types who are here, are most of them still sisters? Or have they left? Have they died off? Or
many of them have died. In fact, that's something interesting. When I was reading the book flying over here, and I was reading about a sister said this, a sister said, and I didn't name them because they were still alive, and I wanted to protect them.
Oh, I see.
Now
okay.
I could name a lot of them.
Name them.
Yes,
yes,
right. But a lot of them have died. A few are still. I mean, Sister Joan Chittister is in the book. She's still out there
right,
pronouncing her pronunciations.
Right.
But
let's say, as we ourselves have, not you, but we've all aged and kind of came through the 60s and the 70s, and we've seen things. We've also, I think it's fair to say, have seen the graying and aging and the winnowing down of dissent. No. In religious orders and in general.
Oh, absolutely. I think that generation is dying out. It's my generation. You know, in fact, I'm often mistaken for a sister because I work in this area. And I keep thinking, you know, I do look a lot like a sister because it's my generation. We're the baby boomers. And that's why there were so many sisters during the 60s, is because it's my generation. But that generation is starting to die off now. And the wonderful traditional orders are getting new vocations. They're getting most of the new vocations.
Mother Assumpta's sisters who are featured on the network, the Nashville Dominicans, and the Sisters of Life, just to name a few, Father Grochel's.
The Franciscans in Illinois, the Franciscans where I live in South Bend, right next door to me in Mishawaka. There are all these new wonderful young sisters coming in, and I think that's, of course, going to be the future of religious life.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, I mean, are there a bunch of big, giant convents that there's only 3 or 4 people in these days?
Sure. And that's going to be a problem too, because these are old buildings, there are a few sisters, and the orders can't afford to maintain them. And so the problem is, where do our elderly go? And the elderly are the ones that my heart aches for, the elderly who are in these LCWR communities. Many of them don't like what's gone on in their communities. They're very faithful to the church, and they don't have a voice. See, the LCWR is just this leadership group. It's not all the sisters. It's not the grassroots sisters.
But they like to paint it that way.
The secular media and the LCWR tend to paint it that way.
Right, exactly. Now, as far as the younger sisters, do you see that they will expand out to take on some of the other older orders? Do you think the older orders will be able to refound themselves? You talk about in the book about the idea of refounding. Or do you think in most cases they're going to drift into history and it's going to be the newer foundations that are really going to take their place as much as there will be sisters?
Well, when we talk newer foundations, I don't think people realize the Nashville Dominicans, for instance, are 150 years old. So I would say the traditional orders will survive and thrive. I don't think we'll ever have 180 80,000 sisters again because of that baby boom anomaly.
Now, I know you were contacted from people all over the world who wanted to know about this book. Is this a crisis just in the United States, or is this something that's pan-global?
It's in Western Europe, Australia, somewhat into South and Central Americas. But no, in your developing countries, no, the sisters tend to be very traditional.
Right. Well, let me just ask you, with the update coming, what do you hope to be able to add into the new book?
Well, I basically will update what is happening with the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and I hope to add that the Leadership Conference has agreed that it does need renewal and that it is being renewed. The Apostolic Visitation, too, will be coming to an end soon, so perhaps...
And obviously, EWTN was founded by Mother Jellica. We have wonderful sisters. They pray for us all the time. We pray for all the sisters, no matter where they are on their journey.
Absolutely.
And we pray that they find the right light and the right path to the truth if somehow they've gotten misguided. Thank you, Ann, for adding to our information about this situation. Ann Carey, her book, Sisters in Crisis, and it's still a classic. And it's entitled The Tragic Unraveling of Women's Religious Communities, available through our Sunday Visitor. That's who publishes it, and it's available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. This is a book you should read. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.